Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Bill Sallurday, and we're going to talk about his ancestors and his research. So thanks, Bill. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, Bob, thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you and share a little bit about my story.
So it looks like you have a town behind you.
Yeah, that's the town. That's the ancestral village of the paternal side. That's San Cipriano Picentino, outside of Salerno in southern Italy.
Oh, cool, cool. Now
Yeah.
I'll have to ask my friend Antonia. I have a good friend from grammar school who just 2 years ago got her Italian citizenship, and she's living in Salerno.
Oh wow.
So I'll have to ask her. I'll
Well,
have to
it's
send her
funny.
that.
I haven't been there yet. Definitely. In fact, we were just trying to figure it out recently. We were looking at going in October, and then long story short is the timing didn't work with COVID and everything else. We just we had to put it off. But it's definitely on the short list for us to get over there.
I know, and it's killing me. We were scheduled to go in April of 2020, and that got canceled. And we were hoping to go in. We're supposed to go in 2 weeks. And I talked to them because I have this whole thing set up with they were going to take me to ancestral home. It's a whole big thing. And I talking to them, and they said we don't know what's going to happen, so we postponed again until next May. So
Yeah, it's sad.
fingers crossed.
Sad. Sad for sure.
But my picture behind me is my third great grandfather's home in Montebello. One
Oh,
of them, anyway.
fantastic.
One of them.
Fantastic.
Um,
I've got a really cool story on that I'll share. It's a long story, but I'll try to net it out through Facebook and whatnot. I ended up on a San Cipriano page. And so we've been, I've just been kind of lurking there and watching and listening to some of the things that are happening in the town. It's just, for the most part, it's all in Italian. So I have to translate everything. But it's all the townspeople, sharing pictures and photos, whatever. And so one day someone shared a painting, a hand drawn painting, watercolor of a street, and the street was Via Capel. And I was, rang a bell in my head through my research, and I was like, geez, that sounds familiar. So I dig through my family tree, and I find out that Via Capel is where my great grandparents lived, and my great grandfather was born. So I was like, well, that's really interesting. And so I went to Street View, and I pull up Google Street View, and I look at where my great grandfather was born. He was born in number 4 Via Capel. And when I pull up the Street View and I look at Via Capel, don't you know that painting, the door for number 4 Via Capel, is in that painting.
wow.
Just amazing. And so I actually did a Facebook post on it to my my friends and family, and I even shared it over to San Cipriano, that said, this is really cool. Like, here's the street view, here's the actual painting. I shared the death certificate of my great grandfather, where it says he lived in number 4 Via Capel. So now I'm working with the gal that owns that painting to see if I can get a copy of the painting and have it printed out and painted here or whatever. So pretty wild.
That's pretty neat. That's really
Yeah.
neat.
Yeah.
So when and why did you get started with your research?
Yeah. So, the last name, right? Sallurday. I always say, growing up as a kid, it was always intriguing to me. I always get, I always got, busted on the playground, right? Sallurday in the park, all that stuff, right? So all the kid stuff. And everybody would always ask, well, what's your, what nationality is Sallurday? And I would say Italian, and people would go, that's not Italian. You don't look Italian. It doesn't end in a vowel. That I don't know where that name came from. But through the years, I just, was always intrigued. And I just remember one year we were driving from Pennsylvania down to Florida with my parents, and I remember going into the motels along the way and looking in the phone book in every motel that we pulled into. I would look through to see if there was a Sallurday in the phone book, and I would never find anybody in the phone book. And so that was always intriguing to me, was to try to find out, with such a unique last name, are there other Sallurdays out there? And how did this name come about? So that's what got me intrigued early on. Then I ended up going to work for a software company that was based in Salt Lake City. And then as one of the events, they took us out one night and we went to the Family History Center in Salt
Mm.
Lake, and they were like, "Oh, so, we can do anything with your family history. We can find this, whatever." So I gave them Sallurday, and they start digging and digging, and I said I stumped the pros. Like they couldn't come up with anything on Sallurday. They didn't know anything about it. They were like, "There's no hits in their database, and the microfiche that they had, they couldn't find anything." So that sent me on the real quest, right? To really try to find out what my last name was, where did it originate, where was what was the proper spelling, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the story behind it.
Yeah, and quite honestly, when I saw Sallurday, I said, it must be his mother who's Italian.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because that's not an Italian name, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So how'd you figure it out?
Yeah. So 35 years maybe or more. I don't know, 30 plus 30, probably around 35 years of digging. And one thing led to another. So, the early, when I started digging after Salt Lake City, I had moved out to Arizona. And when I got here, I was actually pretty close to a local family history center. So nights and weekends, I would go over there and I would start digging away and trying to figure out. I knew that my grandfather, my father was born in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. I knew that my grandfather was born in tiny town called Hawk Run in central Pennsylvania. But that's all I knew at that point. And I didn't even know what his father's name was. My great grandfather, I didn't even know what his first name was. Parents, my father and my grandmother really never talked about it much, probably just like many others. It just didn't really matter. Family history didn't really matter much. And so through the Family History Center, I started going through and looking at census records and whatnot. And I tried Hawk Run is a pretty small town. And so I just started brute force looking at all of the Hawk Run census data from, 1900, right? 1890 doesn't exist. So I started in 1900 and I went page by page looking for anything that looked like Sallurday. And sure enough, and I found in the 1900 census, I think his name was actually, I think it was Saturday in the 1900 census. I think it was actually spelled Saturday. So I was like, wow, that's interesting. And now I've got Joe Saturday. And then he married an English widow that they had a couple of kids. So she had three daughters from a previous marriage. And then that started the ball rolling. And so I started one after the other and, trying to dig up some things. I ended up going to the Clearfield County to get, Joseph Saturday, Soliday, right? There were all different spellings. I got his citizenship papers, right? That he immigrated in 1881 into, of all places, Annapolis, Maryland. So that, threw me off again because it wasn't Ellis Island, right? I couldn't find any records in Ellis Island. That's why the folks in Salt Lake couldn't find anything because there was nobody coming in through Ellis Island. So I just kept running into dead end after dead end. I would get a little bit of data, but it wouldn't have any other information. His declaration, back in the 1880s when he actually signed up his declaration, 1888 is when he signed his declaration. It said he immigrated in 1881, but it didn't say where he came from in Italy. It just said he was, an immigrant from Italy. When he signed, got his naturalization papers in 1890, same thing. It just said he was from Italy and that was it. So, it just kept going. And, then I started digging into Ancestry, right? Around that time, maybe Ancestry.com started coming on. And so I started digging into, more and more of, the records that were on Ancestry.com. And so through that, I found a marriage certificate. The marriage certificate was a big hint because all of a sudden it showed his parents were Alfonso and Vincenza Sallurday. So, and that was in 1893. That was when they were married. So I was like, okay, cool. Now at least I have an Alfonso. I know what his parents' names are, Alfonso and Vincenza. But I didn't know what Vincenza's last name was. And then when I looked at their children, similar to Italian, right? The Italian the way they name their kids, right? The firstborn was Alfonso of the married couple. The firstborn was Alfonso, which was my grandfather, and the firstborn daughter that they had together was Vincenza. So I was like, okay, so now that's lining up, right? The name of their first children that they had together were named after the parents of Joseph or Giuseppe. So yeah, I mean that and then it kept going, right? I looked at the 1920, I think the 1910 or 1920 census ended up having it Sallurday, Sallada, right? And so with central Pennsylvania, I was trying to figure out their accent, right? They have a regional dialect and accent, and I was trying to figure out, how does this name translate? Is it Sallurday? And when I think 1920 it says Sollida. So every different spelling you can imagine was kind of thrown at me through the research. Then, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's dedication.
Yeah, there's the fine line between dedication and stupidity, but it did take a long time to get through it. But the cool thing, right? So just digging in and finding more and more info, I ended up finding the death certificate of Joseph, right? So my great grandfather, he died in 1935, I believe. Another clue, right? So now on the death certificate, it showed Alfonso and Vincenza Janatizzi, Janatisi. That's how it was phonetically spelled. Then I was like, well, there's no J in the Italian alphabet, right? So it's not J. Is it an I, Janatizzi? Is it a G, Janatizzi? And so I started trying to put those in the back of my head in case I saw other instances of those names popping up, right? Then I saw, I got access to the newspapers, right, through newspapers.com, and I find his obituary, and I'm like, okay, great. I find his obituary. Same thing. There's nothing on where he came from in Italy. He was in Italy. He's a citizen of the U.S. for, I think, 57 years or something, which lined up to his original immigration date, etc. So everything I did was really frustrating, right? And again, this is going on decades of, research, little by little, bit by bit. And then I don't know when, at some point, the major clue, the last major clue I had was the death certificate. And I went through and I was looking for any instance of anybody named Alfonso that married a Vincenza, and Alfonso Sabato that married a Vincenza, some form of Janatizzi. And I couldn't find any records to, that would support it and substantiate it. I reached out to professional genealogists in Annapolis, Maryland, to see if there was a ship's record of some sort. The folks in Annapolis were like, there were no real immigrant ships that came through here. So, check Baltimore. So I was looking up in Baltimore and I was like, well, did he say Annapolis, Maryland, but it was really Annapolis, Nova Scotia, because there's Annapolis, Nova Scotia where ships came through. Still couldn't find any records of it whatsoever. And then DNA came on, right? So when DNA hit the scene, all of a sudden I was like, I'm in. Like I'm sign me up. I had already, years prior, I had submitted my DNA to IBM and Nat Geo. Actually, National Geographic did a thing on DNA.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? I don't know.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
A long time ago. And I did that to get but that was like deep ancestral roots. It really didn't get into the, near ancestry. Like, oh, well. But when the Ancestry DNA came out and 23andMe came out and they started, I think I did 23andMe first. When they came out, I jumped in and I was like, this is going to help me for sure. So submit the DNA tests, wait, come back, start pouring through tons of cousins. And I'll say, on the other side of my family, on my mother's side of the family, she's all, I got her back to the Mayflower in the meantime, right? So I've actually, in the middle of building this tree, I'm down, I don't even know, I've got 20,000 people, I think, in my family tree now that go back to the Mayflower on my mother's side. But I still don't know what my last name is, right? I still don't know where he came from in Italy. on my father's mother's side, I've got that back to Italy, and I know the towns they're from in Italy, and I'm, we got that nailed. And Monte Santa Lucia and Decollatura is where they were from in Calabria. But I still was focused on figuring out the Sallurday thing. So through DNA, I started one thing after another, and that was, you talk about tedious, and I started to just get, diving in to see how can I, separate the cousins through DNA to focus on just those that are the Sallurday side.
Mhm.
Right. And
Yeah.
so, doing the leads method and all kinds, I dove deep into the DNA side to start really focusing on how can I identify the ancestors on the paternal line. And so I didn't really care too much about the other, my English side or my Welsh side. I really didn't care too much about that. And as I identified more of those cousins, what I started to do was just build individual trees. So if I had a hit and I knew that it was on my Sallurday line, I isolated that person. I started to build a family tree for that person. I just went and said, okay,
Yeah.
I know who this person is now. I'm going to start building a family tree for them. And so I would start building the family tree back as far as I can go. It would lead me to certain towns in Italy. It's like, all right, well, that's fine. Then I would get another hit, and I would, I'd start, maybe that next hit connects me to that tree, and I would start building that back, and we would still, build it back. So over time, I had these little cells or little networks of individual family units that I was building out their trees. And lo and behold, when I started doing that, I started to see a triangulation around a couple things. Number one, San Cipriano started to pop up more frequently. And so that was interesting. I was like, okay, cool. I think now that town is where, we're going to try to focus. And then the other thing that started to pop up was, as I went back, we saw the name Giannatasio start to populate. And I saw, a couple of family units, that had Giannatasio in the name or in their tree. So that now started to say, okay, cool. Now I'm pretty confident that it was, he was born, and Sabato was the other one. There were a couple of Sabato hits that started to come into play. And so I was like, all right, now it's starting to really kind of hone in. I believe it's Sabato in San Cipriano. I believe he married Giannatasio from the same area. But I didn't have access, or I didn't, I knew Antonati was out there, but I didn't really know how to use it. I'm sure you're familiar with the website, but it was overwhelming to me. I didn't really know how to use it. And one day I was searching and doing whatever, and I saw a little, the ancestry leaf hit on Vincenza Giannatasio. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Normally when I do that, when I see a kind of somebody else, a leaf hit on the ancestry, it typically means somebody's stealing the information from my tree. I don't want to say stealing, but borrowing the information from my tree, adding it to their own tree, right, and building it out. And I'm like, I'm cool with that. I don't care, because it's ultimately going to help me at the end of the day. And I click over and I go look at it, and I'm like, wow, wait a minute, it's tied to a Joseph Sallurday tree. And this person had Joseph Sallurday, and they had his father as Nicola Alfonso Sabato. He had the mother as Vincenza Giannatasio, and maybe had another generation back. I can't even recall. And so I actually started messaging with her, Anna Maria Scarpato, out of Philadelphia, oddly enough, which, again, from Pennsylvania. She was researching the Sabato. She's got a cousin on the Sabato side. I was somehow connected. We were a triangulated cousin somehow to her. I don't have a direct connection, DNA connection to her, but she has a connection to a cousin of mine. And she started interest into the Sabato line. She went out, she knew how to use Antonati. And so when I reached her, I said, hey, where did you do this? Whatever. We started chatting. She opened my eyes to Antonati and how to use it. And she said, here's the records I found, whatever. Well, sure enough, she had actually found. So I'm searching for 35 years, right? I don't know how quickly she did it, but within a matter of maybe a couple of weeks or so, she found the birth certificate of my great grandfather. The dates
Wow.
lined up.
Yeah.
She's got, Giuseppe Sabato, born, July 5th, 1857 in San Cipriano. His parents were Nicola Alfonso Sabato and Vincenza Giannatasio. And it just was like, holy cow. I mean, that's it. Right. So we started going back. And then from there, I started learning Italian and digging into record after record after record. And some of the websites, if I got stumped, I would go to a Facebook group or whatever and submit it, and they would, interpret it for me and help me with the script and the handwriting. But it's just been a gold mine. Between that and the other side is the draft lists out of Salerno. The draft lists have been enormously helpful. And so as I found those lists, again, doing kind of unique searches, I would say, hey, how do I find a Sabato with a parent of Alfonso and Vincenza? And by doing that search, I found siblings of my great grandfather. Right. And so I was like, wow, okay. So now I know he's got siblings that we never knew existed. As far as we know, Joseph Sallurday was the progenitor of the Sallurday name, and that's it. Right. Every Sallurday in the world goes back to him, and that's it. But we didn't know if he had any siblings. And so through this, now all of a sudden we're starting to find out that yes, he had multiple brothers and sisters. Some died early, some survived. Through the San Cipriano Facebook group, I'm actually connecting with cousins that still live in San Cipriano. Right. Some live in London. One lives in the house next to, 4 Via Capelle, which is amazing. And so I guess it's my third cousin still lives in the house next to number 4 Via Capelle. He lives in number 6 Via Capelle.
Wow, that's wild. That's something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a crazy, crazy ride, but yeah, so that's my story, and just a bunch of brute force and a lot of hours.
Yes, thousands of hours, it sounds like.
Yes.
So he came early then. He what'd you say, it was 1891?
1881.
1881.
So, yeah, so it was a very early on in the migration, and I still don't know why, right? So, I actually, I wrote a blog post about this, actually. I don't know if you had a chance to review that or not, but there's a blog post that I have that says from Sabato to Sallurday, and it kind of walks through this whole journey. But at the end of it, I talk about and say there's still so many questions, right? Like, why did he come early? Why did he come alone? Right? How did he end up in Hawk Run, this tiny little town in the middle of central Pennsylvania, where in 1900 there was only one other Italian in that town, and I can't find any connection. So again, looking at the census records from 1900 for that town, I went through every single, hundreds. I don't know. There's maybe 500 or 600 people that lived in that town. So looking through every record, I only identified 2 people that hailed from Italy. My great grandfather and one other person that I don't know. I tried to build a tree for that person to see, like, that was early on too. I was trying to figure out, like, who is this person? And is there a connection to this person as to why my great grandfather ended up there? But I was never able to make that identity or connection.
You would have thought maybe from the same town or something like that. But that's something, especially that early on, and to, like you said, wind up in a town like that. Yeah, it's very strange, and it's that's one of the things that's tough. I've talked to other people. It's tough a lot of times to make that connection. Some people know, because they were miners and it was a mining town, or they were farmers and it was a farming town, or, they were stone workers and it was, that's what they did there. But when you come across cases like this, I can imagine it's very frustrating. And I have a similar thing. I mean, I never understood why my grandmother came, my father's mother came, because there was only 2 Piramalos that came to the United States, her aunt. And much like you, I came across, a 3rd or 4th cousin who was researching her I don't know if it's a great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother, but she was my great-grandfather's sister. And the only thing that we could kind of piece together is that she said her great great grandfather was an entrepreneur from Italy. He came in, we know that they came in 1905. And she says she heard that he set up either a shoe or wallet factory, something to have to do with leather, which was probably maybe what he did over there. And the only thing I could piece together is that my grandparents decided to come, and my grandfather wound up with his own business with his brother, and maybe he set him up. Maybe they said, come to America,
Right.
and we'll put you in business, you know?
Yeah. The land of opportunity, right? Back then. I mean,
Yeah, 1915. Yeah.
yeah, with all of and that was the height of the migration, right? For the
Yeah.
Italian migration was huge then. And there were thousands coming over every day. So, but yeah, and then I struggled. That's why I was like 1881 was early. And, I think I actually wrote in my blog post that I think it was 7 weeks after the gunfight at the OK Corral, right? So that it helps you put things into perspective, right? About like what was going on in the US, and because I live in Arizona, so I was like, geez, I don't know, 1881, what was going, hey, wait, OK Corral was happening. So
now have you found anything interesting back to Italy? Any interesting, either people or occupations or anything?
no, I think the ones that are there now, they were listed as industrialists. And so when I inquired about that, I guess they said, well, it's not really what you think an industrialist is today. It's somebody who worked the land. It's not necessarily a farmer, but they might have had other rights of some sort to the land. So, but I still don't know like exactly what that way. And that was Nicola. That was my great grandfather. But for the most part, they were all farmers, right? San Cipriano was a farming town with, olives and chestnuts and right.
Right. Right. So now,
grapes.
so you touched on your mom's family. Now you have her back to the Mayflower, and that's interesting in that my kids are adopted, and I have my daughter's birth families back, not necessarily to the Mayflower but back to Jamestown.
Oh wow!
And she's direct from Daniel Boone.
Oh wow!
And Captain Morgan.
That's awesome. Well, our claim to fame, and the one that we found was on the Mayflower side. It goes back to John Howland, and Howland was the guy that actually fell off the Mayflower. So if you,
I didn't know that. Somebody fell off the Mayflower.
Yeah. There's actually even a Snoopy cartoon of it. To Charlie Brown around Thanksgiving. If you look around Thanksgiving, Charlie Brown has its normal Thanksgiving special or whatever, but then there's like a Mayflower little short that they do. And they're showing the Mayflower coming over, and then this guy falls over, and they throw him a rope and they pull him back in. And I told my kids, if he doesn't climb back on, we're not here, right? So
that's right. Yeah.
Pretty amazing. But yeah, and on that front too, like as I started going back, some of the things that the first thing that amazed me, right, when you start your tree and you start going backwards, every generation, there's something usually that you're going to find, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I got back to on my mother's side, the Civil War, and I found that my great grandfather on the other side fought in the Civil War, and so there I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And so then I went in and found his records, and you can see he did 3 different tours, and you could see with all the records that are out there where those tours started and ended. And so then I actually plotted that on a Google map, right? That you can actually see them essentially walking, through, all these states and the battles that they fought. He started in either Pennsylvania or New Jersey, depending on the tour, and, was mustered out in Vicksburg, Mississippi. So I'm like, and so I when I found that and discovered that, my kids were a lot younger. And I said, geez, if your great whatever grandfather stood a foot to the right, in one of those battles, he was at the Battle of Antietam, America's, bloodiest war. If he stood a foot to the right, we're not here. Right.
Right. Yeah. I know.
Just amazing how that stuff works. And so then we went back further. When I went back further on my mother's line, there was a battle. They called it Battle of Wyoming in Pennsylvania. And it was the town of Wyoming, Pennsylvania, Luzerne County. And Indians in 1777, I believe it was, Indians attacked the town and took hostage I want to say my 6th or 7th great grandfather, took him hostage. And there's actually same thing. There's a painting that exists of the Indians grabbing him and making him haul all of the, backpacks, and they took him up to upstate New York. And there's an account of how they, burned him at the stake. It was just amazing. So you can read the book, and the Indians soaked pine needles, wood with kerosene, stuck it into his skin, and lit him on fire. Yeah, I'm like, wow, that's pretty wild.
That's a rough way to go. That's
right.
Sure.
So it is pretty amazing. And to look back at the history of those things. And I've helped a bunch of people over the years, that wanted to do this. And, I would always say, look, your ancestors' past don't dictate your future. Right. So, because when you start digging, inevitably you're going to find something that might go wrong. And, somebody was a bad person, or, whatever the case may be. And so I always warn people that, when you do start digging, watch what you wish for and watch what you find. Right. But don't let it impact you.
Yeah.
You are who you are, and for a reason.
I mean, I found out some amazing things through my maternal grandmother, because she came from a noble family, and I was able to trace back to just some incredible people. And, to your point about, the past, I mean, one of my great grandfathers is, Alfonso, the King of Naples, who kept his enemies very close. He had them stuffed and set up around the table like
very close.
And
there you go.
And if you watch the Borgias, they show it,
Wow.
And we watch it. I said to my wife, I said, "That's my grandfather."
Yeah. Barbarian.
Pope Paul III is a grandfather.
That's awesome.
So
yeah.
Pope Paul wasn't supposed to be having kids, but to your point earlier,
go figure.
If he didn't,
you're not here.
But yeah, and I say to people all the time, people say, well, there's millions of people who, and I said, yeah, of course. I said, but to be able to find it, to be able to be lucky enough, and my journey started with on my grandmother's side. She brought my great grandfather's card. I say calling card. It's about the size of an index card. And it has his name on it and a crest, and it says from the Dukes of Capricota. And my mother used to say, Nanny's father was a count. So that's where I started. And when I found him in a record, a nobility record, marrying Amelia Caracciolo, and the names matched, like you said earlier, the way they named my oldest aunt was Amelia. And I called my cousin. I said, have you ever heard this name? And she said, yes, of course, that's Nanny's mother. Well, that just put me on this incredible journey back.
Right.
The Caracciolo's were in Naples since 950.
Wow.
And,
and how did you find that though? Like, how did you get your research done, and how did you determine that far back?
So, well, the way I did it with him was I just put in Nicola Piramalo, because it's an odd name, it's not like John Smith, right?
Right.
So, and this record came up on Angel Fire, and it was the Torchiolo line of the Caracciolo family, and I saw this Nicola Piramalo marrying Amelia Caracciolo. The date was right, 1882. My grandmother was born in 1883. So that all made sense. Huh. Once I had that record, I found the Libro di Oro, which is all the noble records from Naples, from the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies.
The gold book.
Yeah. And so I was able to trace her back to this Teodoro Caracciolo in 950 AD. But between, 1860, when she was born, and 950, there's all of these marriages between the Colonnas the Sforzas, the Este. I mean, all of these people that the Italians, when the Spanish were in charge of the kingdom of the two Sicilies for 300 years, there weren't enough Spanish nobles to marry. So they started marrying the Italian nobles. So that brought me back to the kings of Spain.
Wow.
From there, there's all these marriages going back to 1900, 800, between all of these people in Europe, all of these heads in Europe.
That's crazy.
So it is totally insane.
Yeah.
And I tell this to everybody too. I don't take anything for granted. Like you say, when you look on Ancestry, you look on some of these things. I did independently verify with two two genealogists, and one guy who's in Kai White, who's fantastic. He does Civil War, Revolutionary War genealogy. And when I contacted him, I said, I have Italian nobility, but can you trace it? And he said, well, tell me what you got, and I'll see what I can find. And he verified everything, and
that's cool.
Did this incredible chart for me. But like I said, I don't like taking things for granted, but it's just been this crazy journey. On the converse, Mom is from Farmers in Bari, and I was so excited when I found a guy who was a forest ranger instead of a farmer.
Right. Yeah. Go figure.
Everybody was a farmer and a seamstress.
Exactly. That's on my grandmother's side, right? They were farmers in central Pennsylvania too. So
yeah, but that's what they did.
It is crazy though. I think when I started doing this anyway, I mean, again, my initial goal, back in the late 80s, earlier than that, probably when I was 10 years old, was to really find out what my real last name was. And it really took on probably in the late 80s. And so,
now, so I have to ask, so with that name, so your father knew he was Italian, but he had no idea. No,
originally they said, well, we think it might be like Sabato or Salbetto, but we don't know. We don't know what it was. And my grandfather had passed, in 1971 when I was just a little kid, right? So I never had the opportunity to talk to him, or never had the inkling to talk to him. But my grandmother passed away, right, in 1995. And I did have a chance to talk to her, and I said, do you recall, do you remember anything? And she said, we really didn't talk about it, blah, blah, blah. It's, it was Sabato or Salbetto, Sabbato, Sabato, Salbeto. I mean, it was all over the place, and they didn't know. And then, did he have any siblings or anything? No, we don't know. I mean, we just grew up in the little town in central Pennsylvania. So, yeah. And then, when the other piece is, so my father, he only had one sibling. They had twin boys that passed away from pneumonia back in the early days, but there was only one other sibling that survived, right? And my grandfather and grandmother that had those two boys, they left central Pennsylvania, went to northeastern Pennsylvania. They went up to Scranton and settled in Scranton during the Depression. And so growing up, it literally was my father and his family and his brother and his family. They were the only Sallurdays anyone ever knew, right? We kind of knew that, and again, back in the 70s, right, the late 60s, early 70s, central Pennsylvania might as well have been across the country, right? Like we didn't travel to go see them, or we didn't know who they were, right? We knew that there were other cousins out there, which were my grandfather's siblings, but there were no family reunions. There were none of that. So, over time that, those relationships just kind of, melted away, and nobody knew. And I will say, back in the 90s or so, I did go went to central Pennsylvania and met with a cousin. Just randomly went out and met with him, knocked on his door basically, and started talking to him about family history. And so he said, I don't know much. He was the son of, so he was my father's cousin. So it was a son of my grandfather's brother, right? He's like, yeah, I don't know much. Same thing, maybe Sabato, but we don't have anything, blah, blah, blah. He said, I might have some photos around if you're interested. I'm like, yeah, of course. So he ended up giving me original photos of my great grandfather and my grandfather and his brother from back in the, early 1920s, which is kind of cool.
That's pretty cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was able to capture some of those, but same thing. They didn't know anything. They didn't, whatever. But the other thing is, another source I used extensively was newspapers, right? So the newspapers.com subscription or whatever is what I used a ton, and found some interesting things there too, but nothing earth shattering. Did find, instances of my great grandfather and the, again, unique spellings, and, maybe he was in a car accident and, he fell down the steps of the courthouse or whatever, those kind of things, which was, pretty interesting to see.
Yeah. And, and I've used it too. And I found out things about Italy from a small newspaper in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And from the 20s.
Yeah.
Because my grandparents, my father was young, like 3, 4, 5 years old. My grandparents were living in Scotch Plains, New Jersey.
Okay.
And I found the local newspaper, and they had obituaries in that local paper of my grandmother's family back in Italy.
That's awesome.
And I found out that my grandfather's father was a Supreme Court justice in Naples.
Wow.
Who knew?
You're royalty.
Who knew?
You're royalty.
But that I haven't been able to verify yet. I'm still, it says it in the paper. I'm kind of going with it, but I still want to verify it with somebody in Italy and say, can you find this out? Because I can't.
Well, it's funny. I just listened to your previous guest that you had on that does the citizenship.
Oh yeah.
Support,
yeah.
right? So I listened to that, and because I dug into that a little bit to figure out, can I do this? And I think it'd be, if not for me, for my kids, right? I think it'd be interesting to pass on to my kids if they can become citizens. And when I originally looked at it, people that I talked to said it's going to be next to impossible because of the name change.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be, if you can't have that consistency that shows the birth records and, all the matching, but you got somebody that's a Sabato, magically he appears in the US as a Sallurday. How do you know that's the same guy? Right.
Yeah. Unless you could do it through your grandmother. That.
Yeah, I guess that's the other place I can go for sure. That's
something to explore. But he does do a half-hour free consultation, so
yeah,
doesn't hurt to ask. He may come up with some way of doing it.
I might have to go move to Italy for 60 days or something. Just go set up camp over there.
I sent him. I'm 70, so I don't think I could wait 8 years. Right. But it is on my mind. So I did send him some of the stuff that he needs and have him look at it, and then I'll try and decide. I wouldn't mind spending 45 days in Italy.
Right. There are worse things to do with your time.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Bill, this has been absolutely fabulous. I appreciate that. And for anybody who's thinking of giving up, don't let Bill be your example.
Yeah.
30 years in the making.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll tell you what, it was super, super rewarding when it happened. And by the way, this just happened. We found the records just over a year ago, July of last year. In fact, we found the records, I think, 2 days before the birthday of Joseph Sabato.
That's because they want us to find them.
Exactly. It was so, it was just so cool. So, and then just tying it together with that town, I had just posted on the, on the Facebook page the other day that, I wasn't born there, I've never been there, but I can't help but feel connected to the community of San Cipriano. So
absolutely.
It's really neat.
And before we go, what's the blog?
So you can find my information at wanderingspectator.com. So wanderingspectator.com is a blog that I do about a lot of my posts. But you'll find the Sallurday or Sabato to Sallurday there. And I'll put in a shameless plug for my true crime there too. Because what I started doing, Bob, is looking through the old newspapers, I started finding like the Black Hand, right?
Mhm.
So the old mafia, I found some stories of my hometown in Scranton from back in the early, 1920s, early, late teens. And I started writing about some of the Black Hand activity and whatnot, and just the accounts that I was able to uncover through the newspaper, and just doing the Italian stuff that the pocket of Italians that was in that area doing coal mining was actually pretty cool. So,
Oh, okay, great.
yeah.
All right, we'll look forward to it. All right, well, thanks again.
You got it. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.